Hello, I'm Brian. What do we got for today's story? Let's take a look, shall we? Ooh. Today's story is Goldie's Last Day. Goldie hung on for dear life. He'd never been afraid of heights before, but it was a long way down, and for the first time in his life, he felt an icy river of fear coursing through his veins. Throughout his many days, he'd always loved the wind, the way it felt brushing up and around him, cooling him on warm days, singing to him when it wove through the branches of the trees like a hummingbird that's not quite sure where it wants to go. But today was a different story. Today the wind was his enemy. It tore at him, grabbed at him with sharp, angry fingers, doing everything in its power to pull him down. Today the wind didn't sing to him. Today it howled with rage, as if somehow Goldie had offended it. Even though it was getting harder and harder to hold on, Goldie still managed to think back to better times. It's funny, he thought, how you can still manage to think good thoughts even when you're at your most frightened. It didn't make sense. Here he was, using his last remaining threads of strength just to hold on for a few more minutes, and his thoughts were turning to the many wondrous and memorable things he'd witnessed in his lifetime. Life was clever and secretive that way. He'd always considered himself a lucky sort. He'd been blessed with seeing things most others simply brushed off as everyday occurrences. But not him. He saw them as the little miracles they really were. Little things that made up the fabric of everyday life. Little things he treasured. He remembered all the children who would play in the field that stretched out in front of him. The little girl with the checkered shirt and pants 2 sizes too big who rode a bicycle for the first time just over by the bench. The same bench where a young boy, with a yellow baseball cap, worn backwards of course, had used his pocket knife to carve his and his girlfriend's initials in the back left corner below the third board, when he thought no one was watching. The countless baseball games where the winners cheered and the losers kicked their gloves back to the parking lot. Yes, Goldie was lucky that he could see the magic in these small events, but his luck was running out. His grip was slipping. He knew he wouldn't be able to hold on much longer. The traitorous wind tugged and teased, trying to tear his grip free. But at that moment, when Goldie thought he could not hold on a moment longer, he saw a little girl and her grandfather crossing the field toward him. Perhaps they will help me, he thought, and the image of the girl being hoisted up by her grandfather to keep Goldie from falling gave him new strength. He tightened his grip, and he refused to go without a fight. But he knew it would only last a moment. The girl and her grandfather were so far below. They would never see him way up where he was. And finally, with a great sigh, Goldie let go. The old man turned his ocean blue eyes toward the great tree before him and pulled the collar up of his trusty wool coat up around his ears just as the bitter wind was dying down. "Look, honey, make a wish." The little girl followed her grandpa's gaze up to the branches of the gnarled old tree. "Why should I wish, Grandpa?" "Because you should always make a wish when you see the last leaf of autumn fall to the ground." The girl looked up, and sure enough, there it was, the last leaf from an otherwise bare tree slowly dancing on the wind, winding its way down to the ground. She watched it spin and flutter for what felt like an eternity, then closed her eyes tightly and made her wish. It was a beautiful, full leaf, a rich reddish gold with just a hint of brown at its edges. She held the leaf carefully, like she was holding the crystal vase that her mother was so nervous about that sat on the fireplace mantel. When her grandfather caught up with her, she was holding the leaf up to the sun, looking at the hundreds of fine veins that crisscrossed through it. She reached into her pocket and took out a book that she had kept there and delicately opened it up. She slipped the leaf between the dog-eared pages and slowly closed the book. She turned a missing tooth smile to her grandfather, and she placed the book back inside of her pocket. There. Now when my wish comes true, I'll always be able to open my book and thank the little leaf that made it all possible. The old man smiled down at the little girl and said, "That is a truly lucky leaf."